very special in the sense that myself coming from a diverse group, and I'm from Singapore, Malaysia, that's my home, but I've been here for a long, long time. And I look around and see all of you in the faces, it makes me so excited. It is right here, diversity, I see inclusiveness. These are all my friends, all of you. Some of the people I've seen, I'm going to meet for the first time. And it is such a joy that we could really gather this evening. So I really, from my bottom of my heart, so I want to say muchas gracias, and then at the same time, namaste, and thank you, and harigoto as well. I speak a couple of languages and slowly forget. So it's really a joy. I see this panel over here, marvelous panel, and we are very thankful for your time as well today, coming here. So I introduce myself. I'm the chairperson for the Central Washington Diversity Council. My name is Sivaji Subramaniam, and I'm still holding on to my name that my parents have given me from an Indian background, but I'm really a Malaysian, so I want to keep up to that. So I come from a multicultural, multilingual, and then multi-religious family background. And I see it right here. And when I see Roopsi here, and then her bringing her dad, and then joining us, namaste, and then the rest here, and the little grandson, and some of the others who are seeing, and my Hispanic friends over here, which is gracias, and it's really marvelous to see you all. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Esteemed panelists and members of our vibrant community, it is with great pleasure and enthusiasm that I welcome you all to our Voices and Stories event, celebrating multiculturalism and embracing diversity in our community. Today, we gather here to explore the richness of our collective cultural heritage, to discuss the boundless benefits of multiculturalism, and to share the profound personal stories that illuminate the value of cultural diversity. Our hope is that this event will serve as a catalyst for meaningful conversations and actions, sparking further initiatives to promote diversity, inclusion, and equity within our community. We invite you all to engage actively, listen with an open heart, and embrace the unique experiences and insights our panelists have to offer. You will have an opportunity to ask any questions that you may think of towards the end of our time together. And let us embark on this journey together as we celebrate multiculturalism and take a step closer to building a more inclusive and harmonious community. I kindly ask, if your phones are not on silence, to put them on silence. So we're going to start by introducing our panelists today. On my very first left side is Dr. Darshan Singh Sehbi, who is a board-certified practicing psychiatrist. He has been fortunate enough to have lived in 3 continents that enriched him with their diverse cultures. So 3 continents. Dr. Sehbi was born in India at a time when India was under British Raj. After India got independence, his family moved to a different state where he grew up and completed medical education. Dr. Sehbi came to the United Kingdom in 1975, where he received further education and served in the National Health Service for 20 years. He was awarded membership of the prestigious Royal College of Psychiatrists of England in 1980. Dr. Sehbi came to the US and has been living in Dayton with his family since '95. He served as a faculty member at Wright State University Bonsall School of Medicine. He's the president of India Foundation, a past president and current member of the Sikh Society of Dayton. He's presently also a board member and treasurer of the Interfaith Forum of Greater Dayton and is actively involved in various charity work. Wow. Welcome, Dr. Sehbi, and thank you for taking the time to be here. Next, we have Rosealia Sanchez. She goes by Rosie. A resilient and dynamic individual, has been on a remarkable journey of empowerment and community service since her arrival in the United States from Mexico in 2008. A resident of Dayton since 2012, Rosie is the embodiment of the American dream, showcasing how determination, faith, and hard work can lead to success, not only for oneself, but for an entire community. As the owner of G&F Cleaning Services, a thriving local women-owned Hispanic business, Rosie has not only managed her own time according to her schedule, how awesome is that, but has also created a platform for others to build meaningful careers and support their families. She firmly believes that we are all equipped with the right tools to improve our lives and make a positive impact on our communities. Beyond her role as an entrepreneur, Rosie is a devoted wife and mother of 4 children, demonstrating that it is indeed possible to excel in both and professional spheres. Her unwavering commitment to family values and community welfare shines through in her actions. She has become a pillar of support for Hispanic families in Dayton, offering her time and talents to bridge language gaps by translating for them during school meetings and medical appointments. Thank you, Rosie, for being here today. And last but certainly not the least, Jason Bunger is the lead pastor at Hope Church in Dayton, Ohio. A former public school teacher, so clap for that, please. Jason's passion is to reconcile people to God and to one another by experiencing the Word of God in accurate, passionate, and understandable ways. Jason is a graduate of the University of Toledo, Moody, Michigan Theological Seminary, and holds a Doctor of Ministry from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Jason has served as an associate pastor at Phillips Temple in Dayton and has taught for Dayton Public Schools, Narayan College, Alliance Theological Seminary, and Moody Theological Seminary. Jason, thank you for being here today and giving us your time. All right, so now we will begin with our questions with our panelists, and we're going to actually start with Dr. Sehbi. So Dr. Sehbi, tell us, how has your cultural background enriched your experience of living in this community?
I'm very delighted to be here today. I'm going to start sharing with you briefly my faith background. Sikh scripture, Guru Granth Sahib says that there is light in all, and that light is the Divine One. We believe that all people are created equal and are equal values in the eyes of God. Just as we see the many differences in humanity, unique cultures, languages, skin tones, and accents, we also see the spark of the divine in every human being. Just a quote: "One God created all men are molded of the same clay. Recognize the Lord's light within all, and do not consider social class or status. There are no classes or castes in the world hereafter." Guru Granth Sahib, page 349. You travel around India and you will hear a multitude of languages. In fact, it may feel like you hear hundreds. While India has 22 separate official languages, it is home to a total of 121 languages and 270 mother tongues. India has over 19,500 dialects. India is a birthplace of Hindu, Sikh, Buddhism, and Jain. India is also home for Muslim, Christian, Parsi, Baha'is, Jews, and Ahmadiyas. I was born in India and was fortunate enough, like we heard before, to have grown up with kids of different cultures, belief systems, and backgrounds. I did not feel there was any difference between me and others. This background has helped me adjust to life in the US since it does not seem novel to me to live with people who don't look like me or talk like me and have beliefs different from mine. For me, we are all brothers and sisters and children of same God. Came to UK and was exposed to and learned about Western cultures and traditions. Then I came to US. I was so excited for the fact that now I would be able to meet with people from different geographical backgrounds, Japanese, Chinese, Russian, among many, many, many other, without having a need to go there. That was my first impression. Just give you one example. It was my first day at work at the VA hospital. I parked my car, went to elevator, and there was a lady, another passenger in the elevator. She looked at me. She was so excited, full of joy, and she said something which I don't remember, but she said, "Can I touch your beard?" And I said, "Yes, of course." I was new to this culture, first day, didn't know, and staying in British culture, you have to keep a distance. In India also, but she was so like close, like she's known me forever, and she did touch my beard. So many positive experiences that I had since being here, traveling by air, road, attending concerts, musical events, and fairs, spending a day or longer enjoying simply being with people. All this new knowledge enriched my experience of living in this new community in the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sehbi. Rosie, the next question is for you. What role do schools and educational institutions play in fostering an appreciation for cultural diversity among the younger generation?
I believe schools and institutions plays a very important role because it's in early life that we need to tell our children that diversity is something good.
Thank you. All right, Jason, share an experience, please, when you had to confront cultural biases, either personally or on behalf of someone else. How did you handle the situation, and what lessons did you take away from it?
You know I'm a preacher, right? So one of the things I believe about diversity is that it doesn't happen by accident. That you have to intentionally pursue relationships with people that may be unlike you. So that's one of the values both of our family and of our ministry. And so I remember a couple years ago, I invited one of my pastor friends, Pastor Marcellus Cunningham of the Shiloh Baptist Church in Dayton, to come preach for us. Shiloh has historically been one of the strongest black churches in Dayton. Pastor Cunningham is just an amazing preacher, and we were glad to have him there that day. Well, it just so happened that the day he was scheduled for, I'm waiting for him at the church, and I get a news flash on my phone. And I look at it, and it was the report of the shooting in Buffalo that took place the night before. So Dr. Cunningham comes in, he sits down. I said, listen, first of all, I appreciate the fact that you're with us today because I know you really need to be with your congregation. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if you were preaching in your church today, what would you say? And he said, I would I would tell them to hold on, that things are going to get better, to not let this event define who we are, where we're going. But I would give them hope that things will get better. Dr. Cunningham preached for us that morning, and after he was finished, I just kind of felt prompted to say something to our congregation. So I got up and I said, listen, I'm going to say something. I said, Dr. Cunningham doesn't know I'm saying this. I said, but sometimes I need to be the encourager and sometimes I need to be the prophet. So I said, I'm going to tell you all something that's going to be difficult to hear, but I need you all to hear me out in saying this. And I talked about the shooting that happened the night before. I said, there's something I've come to realize in the last couple years that I never knew before, and it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. And what that was is that typically, people that look like me, that live in the West, we look at things very individualistically. And so when we look at a situation like the shooting the night before, we would say that that was one single individual that doesn't represent anybody else, that was acting on his own behalf. I said, but the rest of the world doesn't see that. Most of the rest of the world thinks very collectively, very communally. And so while people that look like me look at that event, it looks like one single individual committing one single act. The rest of the world looks at a pattern that seems to happen over and over and over again. And the question is, why in situations like this does the same thing seem to be happening over and over and over again, and yet we not say or do anything about it? And it was difficult for people to hear. It's difficult for me to say. But I said, listen, it would be disrespectful for me not to acknowledge what happened. It would be disrespectful for me not to say anything about it. In the letter of, in Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, he talks about, there's a part where he talks about driving through the country and seeing churches in the background. And he says, I wonder what God you serve in those churches. Tell me what is the God that you serve in those churches that would cause you to be so silent on issues that are so important. And I think one of the challenges that we have is on these big issues of life, we sometimes neglect the fact that other people interpret and see the events that oftentimes that we don't. That we oftentimes typically look at isolated events that have nothing to do with each other. Where people outside us oftentimes see patterns that are there that sometimes we can fail to acknowledge. One of my heroes, Dr. Tim Keller, says that it is really impossible to understand your own culture until you spend time in another culture. You know that if you're married, because when you grow up, you think your family's normal, right? Then you get married, you're in somebody else's family, and you realize that your family is somewhat unique. It is really not until we get outside of our own culture, both geographically and relationally, that we can understand and appreciate and see the idiosyncrasies in that culture, but more than that, within our own culture. And so sometimes that's hard to hear, but I believe that on some issues we as people have erred on the side of being silent rather than being gracious and kind and compassionate.
Wow, very powerful answer. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. All right, Dr. Sehbi, we're going to come back to you. Are there any misconceptions about certain cultures within our community, and how can we address and dispel these misconceptions?
Well, living here in the US and before that in other place, I learned so many similarities in people from different cultural background. However, I also noted misconceptions stemming from stereotypes and lack of exposure to other cultures, like we just heard. For example, people are judged based on their color, gender, beliefs, geographical background as being superior or inferior in terms of their ability and efficiency at work, social skills, academic achievements, etc. So when I make a phone call, somebody says hello, and I say hello and tell my name, they already have a lot of information about me. The voice, the talking, my grammar, English. And then when they see me, then they, even walking through the door, they see me, they immediately know. I am brown skin, I have a beard, and whatever. So that's the understanding people have. Some of it is entirely misconception. Incident of 9/11, we all went into shock. It took several days to realize, is it really happened? But it has, because I saw it on television. And then came the media showing pictures of bin Laden, brown color, turban, and then followed the incidents of hate crime. Within 4 days, in Arizona, a person named Balbir Singh Sehbi, sitting outside his gas station taking care of flower beds, was shot dead. Not knowing who the person is, and no thought about that he cannot be terrorist just because he looks similar in appearance. So that was the height of misconception. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. But in everyday life, we judge people without even knowing the person. There may be language barriers, people may misunderstand, but these misconceptions reflect in almost all aspects of life, such as job selection. I have someone working for me currently doing some work in my house, and he tells me he goes to interview for certain jobs. He says when they read my resume, they shortlist me. And they talk on the phone. They said, okay, come. And say, as soon as I walk there, I'm rejected, which may not be actual based on misconception because he is a black person, but nevertheless, he feels that way. So that affects him, or if I was in his situation. There was a research done in New York a couple of decades ago. There were job vacancies for residency, and somebody did a research. How come in your hospital you are shortlisting only certain type, mainly white? So he said, well, we get applications and we only need 6 places and there are 200. We don't have time to go through. I just asked somebody to look at the application, name and etc. Just select maybe 10. So that's another kind of misconception based. There was a research done in the UK when I was there. Let me know when the time is up.
You are totally fine. Keep
Okay.
going.
And similar finding, admissions to medical college, and there was certain group of people being selected. And they were asked, how come you decide like this? They said, well, we don't even, it's our computer generated. So it turns out to be the computer was fed certain type of questions, and the scoring was done in a way that kind of select, like a, what's the word? Selection, the scoring was affected. Then they, of course, they corrected it. So question is how we can, what we can do, how we can address, how we can dispel these misconceptions. So there are no simple answers, of course. Many different thoughts. One is that we make an attempt to get together, mix with people, meet with them, learn about their background, sharing knowledge about our background with them. And we can start by addressing this question by helping kids in school. They are young. I believe, many people believe, God resides in the hearts of children. And that's where we need to focus, help them be together. Most of the education is kind of geared to scoring marks and getting numbers, but I think we should also focus on that we are going to be living together, working together, and learning about each other. Likewise, the teachers, the education authorities have a major role. And then helping our prominent people, responsible people who have a lot of responsibility. For example, law enforcement agencies. We sometimes watch, maybe rightly or wrongly, pointing out that there was this concept, misconception based on color. So we can help them to be more accepting and still doing their job the way we expect them, and we, of course, thank them for that. They put their lives in risk, major risk, so they have a lot of responsibility. I'm part of Interfaith Forum of Greater Dayton. And my intention there is to learn about other faiths and share with them my belief system. I think our religious organization have a major role, good opportunity to move in that direction. In my faith, there are a few things. For example, every prayer service is followed by what we call langar. It is a free vegetarian food, freshly cooked. And the principle is that all are welcome. You don't have to be a member of that place. That's all over the world. The most important religious place in India is called Golden Temple. Of course, the visitors come from all over. And on average, 50,000 to 100,000 people attend based on the occasion, and they are all served food. Well, food is one thing, but that's how we do. I think all faiths, I've learned, give the same teaching, that we are equal, we should respect each other, and that's what they do. But I think if we can go a little further, our churches or other places of worship, they have major role to play in that kind of learning about others. Similarly, we can focus on workplace environment. And many other aspects we can use. But we have to move further and hopefully have a clearer picture of other cultures, removing any misconceptions we may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sehbi. There were some great ways you shared to mix in with different cultures. I think food is always a great way to bring people together. So I think that's great. I do also think, like you said, workplaces for sure have a big role to play. I find that we're in a much different state now than perhaps we were in 10, 20 years ago, where we have a lot more backgrounds and diversity recognized in our workplaces. But the fact does remain that as you climb the ladder, if you will, minorities don't have the same representation as some of our other groups do. So we still have a long ways to go, but there's certainly progress been made along the way. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. All right, Rosie, I'm going to come to you next. What challenges have you faced in promoting multiculturalism, and how have you overcome them?
The big challenge for me is being in a different country. The language barrier has been the biggest one, but I think learning is the key. So keep learning. Education, that is the most important. Never stop learning. So that's the only way that you can overcome. So learning from each other, learning from different cultures, religions. So I think that's the thing.
That's great. And you're also giving back by helping other people in your community by being an interpreter of sorts for them, for their different appointments. Are there any stories or experiences you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I feel like I'm useful. After I learned English, I wanted to help other families to be successful or to have at least some help at medical appointments or at school issues with their kids, because it's very difficult to be in a place and you cannot understand what people are saying to you. So I feel good doing these things for those families, even though I have so much more to learn, but what I have, I share.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Rosie. All right, Jason, coming to you. In what ways has cultural diversity influenced your career or profession? How do you leverage your unique background to bring about positive change in your field of work?
Good question. So, as you know, I'm a preacher. You know he's not, because he asked how much time he has. I just assume I got all the time. So one of my favorite stories in Scripture is, it's an Old Testament. It's about a gentleman by the name of Joseph. And I'm going somewhere with this, okay? So just, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
All right. By a guy by the name of Joseph. And long story, takes up probably about the last 12 chapters of Genesis. But there's one event in the life of Joseph that's really unique. And that is, he has risen to Joseph has been sold into slavery. He's living in Egypt, but he has great favor, and he has ascended to what would be the equivalent of the Secretary of State. He is working for Potiphar, and basically Potiphar has entrusted him with everything, with one exception, and that is he is not allowed to mess with Potiphar's wife. And the story goes that Potiphar's wife began seducing him on multiple occasions, and he would resist her and tell her no. Finally, the last time she seized him by his garment, he says no. He runs off, and then he becomes falsely accused and is thrown in prison. The interpretation that I've always heard of this story for so long was that this story shows how when we resist the temptation of seduction, how God has preserved his people in the midst of that. But then it began to dawn on me. Maybe someone from a different background may interpret that story a little bit differently. Here's Joseph, who's been sold into slavery. He is in a foreign land. He has been given a position that people from his background don't have. It works well as long as he plays by the rules. Then he is seduced by a person in power. And once he is seduced by this person in power, he resists her. But because she's in a position of power, in a position of influence, she is able to control the narrative on what happens. And so what she tried to do to him, she accused him of doing to her. She gathers all the people around, and it's interesting, she says that this man has come here to make sport of us. Not me, but us. She has turned the narrative of not this guy tried to do this to me, but has turned it to these people are trying to do this to us. And so he's put in prison without representation, and the whole society basically turns against him. Now I would have never looked at that aspect had I not considered what it would be like to experience that situation from a different vantage point or a different viewpoint. And in both situations, one of the things that we know is that from the first viewpoint, most of the commentators that wrote on that basically came from a viewpoint that had never experienced the situation from the second. And in both situations, one of the things that we learn is the same message applies to both. And that is that even though Joseph was falsely accused, even though he was maligned, even though that he was had trumped up charges, even though he was manipulated, even though he was put in these situations, that in the midst of that God still protected him, still looked out for him, and that eventually that God had taken his suffering and had used it for his glory, because the truth eventually came out. In fact, it's rather interesting. It says when her husband found out, it says that he was greatly enraged. First reading, it would seem that he was enraged at him. But you look closely and you realize he's not enraged at him. He's actually enraged at her. Because the husband knows something unjust is taking place, but he can't do anything about it. But when he can't do anything about it, when Joseph can't do anything about it, God does something about it and makes it right. And so, in situations like that, we recognize that when we look at the scriptures and when we engage in life, we not only extract what is in the scriptures, we also unintentionally bring our own experiences, our own hurts, our own disappointments, our own joys, and our own perspectives. And that gives a perspective on the message of Scripture that we simply cannot get if we only look at it from our own experience or from our own background.
Wow. I find that when I do my spiritual reading, it makes a lot of sense conceptually to me. And the application of it, though, because you get in the minutiae of everyday living, and then you're like, oh, I read this, but I forgot to apply it. And so it's this constant conscious awareness of what you're reading, of applying that. And in your example, that was the first thing that popped in my head, is we see things around us, but perhaps we don't always see from a different angle, and then you combine that with what you're learning on an everyday basis, and the application of it. At least that's what it stirred for me. But thank you for sharing that for us. All right, Dr. Sehbi, I'm going to come back to you. Can you share a story about a time when your cultural background or traditions were celebrated and embraced by others in a way that made you feel valued?
There have been quite a few. incidents, and like you just said, consciously aware. That's how we practice, how we are brought up, raised from early childhood, that we should be consciously aware. I'm using your phrase. What is my duty? And there are a couple of things in my faith that I learned and practice is seva, which is service. And this is a unique service that you do for others without expecting any reward. So called selfless service, and that is part of our life. And that applies to me, my wife, my children. And give you one example. I was president of Sikh Society of Dayton, and we heard the news of New Orleans Katrina disaster. And we've been doing that before. Anytime we hear something bad happening, we start raising funds. So we start doing the same thing. And my daughter, who was in high school, came to me. She was obviously very upset, like rest of us, and said, "Daddy, I'm not happy. You're doing all this fundraising. You will collect money and send there, and then forget." She said, So I said, "What do you want to do?" She said, "I want to go there, be with the people who are going through this distress. They have become suddenly homeless. They have no place to live or care for their day-to-day things. I want to go there and serve them." So we hired a van, and people found out, and they came with all kind of things to carry. So another member of my community, wife and my daughter, we went there. We stayed there for a week, and I'm glad that I went there. So in a way, it was satisfaction that I am there, away from work and everything, with them. FEMA organized our daily round, going to different shelters. Another couple, both doctors, actually Wright State graduate, and they had moved to Chicago. They also came. So like full team. But the experience I had was very, very traumatic. Just witnessing, I went to see the city. There was not a single person. Houses were filled with flood water and receded. The lot of fungus, windows were closed, and basically ruined like some kind of chemical bomb or something. So that kind of after effect. But at the time, we felt, well, sense of achievement. You call it, it's difficult to describe, basically, but you can call it anything, but that's how we felt. We go to serve food in homeless shelter, all kind of such activities. And like you said, because we have been taught like that you have to do for others. Whenever people are in distress, whatever you can do, you have. And well, you can see it gives you, I don't know, shall I say satisfaction? But at least it gives me that I'm fulfilling my duty, not doing anything special for others or myself, just my duty. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sehbi. All right, Rosie. How can we encourage individuals from diverse backgrounds to actively participate and contribute to community activities?
I think just not to be afraid to do new things. So, for example, I am a little bit afraid to be here today. I was afraid to make mistakes because of my accent, speaking English. But don't be afraid. So try new things. and of course, keep learning about others. So everybody is unique, special, and everyone has something to offer, and everybody has talents that we can use to help each other.
Well, thank you, Rosie. It takes courage to participate as a panelist. We certainly appreciate you taking the time. And thank you for sharing the vulnerability that you did with us and your candidness. Can we give a round of applause to her? Okay, Jason, this is our last question for tonight. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. So the pressure is on. No, I'm kidding. Can you share a personal story that exemplifies the power of multiculturalism in bridging divides and building connections within our community?
So one of the things that I've kind of realized recently is there's a quote that says that there are no boring lives. We just haven't asked enough questions or gotten to know people well enough. So I began my ministry, much of my ministry, on the other side of town in a very impoverished area. And one of the things that we began to notice when we were working with children in that community is that there were three things that were really impacting them. Number one, they were growing up in homes where there was a lot of poverty, and so there was, as we would say, more month than there was money. So there was no money at the end of the month. The second thing that we noticed was that there was a lack of fathers in the home. So the majority of children that we were working with had no father, and so therefore they were, a lot of studies consistently show that just the positive influence of a father. And the third problem we noticed was that there was a drug problem that was taking place in the community. So when I moved to this side of the town, I met one of your colleagues closely, and I said, listen, I need you to explain to me the nuances of our community. And I learned three things very quickly. First thing I learned was that people in our community often struggle as much as financially as much as people in another community. And we don't feel it and we don't see it because the houses that people may live in and the cars that they may drive and the titles that they may have may be a bit nicer. But the majority of people you and I run into are, they just have bigger bills at the end of the month. And so whether it's gym shoes or whether it's sports cars, most people are spending money they don't have on things they don't need to impress people they don't like. And that is true in any culture. And at the end of the month, in fact, I was talking with one of your colleagues, and he told me this. He says, Jason, it's not uncommon for me to go into a $1 million home and to not see any furniture. Because oftentimes people are more impressed with the image that they're projecting rather than what they really deal with. And so we talk about people struggling financially, whether you're on one side of town or the other side of town. It's a different struggle, but the majority of people struggle at the end of the month to pay their bills, no matter what side of town you live on. The second thing that I realized is that likewise we had a father crisis within our community as well. It's not because Dad wasn't around. It's because Dad was oftentimes working 80 and 100 hours a week to buy things for his children, in which his children really didn't want those things. What they really wanted was their father. And the third crisis that I began to notice was, I have to say this sensitively, so the things in the previous community that people were going to the corner house to get, the same things were being acquired in the new community. It's just they were getting a prescription for the same exact thing. So in both communities, I recognized that people were struggling financially, that children were struggling with issues of belonging, especially from wanting acceptance from parents. And people were looking for ways to deal with the pains of life through some sort of coping mechanism. And here's what I noticed. In both communities, in both cultures, in both demographics, it was the same problems and the same challenges. They were just approached in different ways. And so it made me realize that really at its core, we all struggle with the same stuff. We want to know who we are, we want to know where we belong, we want to make sure that we can take care of those that we love, that love us. If you have children, doesn't matter where you're from, you panic the moment you bring them home from the hospital. You do. You pray for them when they're teenagers. You stay up late for them when they come home. You wonder if you're going to meet the right person. You're going to handle things right. You're going to be nervous when you walk into a room and you don't know people. At its core, we really all struggle with the same challenges, but oftentimes we don't get to see that because we don't sit down long enough to really hear one another's stories. And really, at the end of the day, we really all want the same things out of life. We're just not quite sure how to secure those things and to secure those relationships.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, so we have a couple of questions from our audience. Dr. Sehbi, the first one is for you. You mentioned in your first comment that there are over 100 languages spoken in India. With so many languages, how do people talk to each other?
Well, that is a real challenge. Hindi is a national language, but it's not spoken in their daily life in some of these states. English is another, like a second language, and of course spoken by people in all states, but not everyone in that state. So it's very difficult. So you go to different state, railway signs, road signs, English, Hindi, and local language. At least 3 signs. So it is a difficult task, and occasionally there is some prejudice as well, that if you don't speak in my language, very similar. I went to France a long time ago, Paris. I'm asking a question in English, and they're answering in French. They understood what I said. So these are small examples, but majority of the situation, it is very difficult. Things have changed since independence. The media, social media, the television is helping. And the biggest help is from film industry, the Bollywood. So hoping that, but anyway, most people know 3 languages, Hindi, English, and local. Some may know 4 languages. My brother, he knew 4 languages. So that kind of, again, another richness of diversity to have a positive outlook. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, if you come across an Indian, they will probably know 4 to 5 different languages, right? Which is pretty cool. So along the same lines, and this question is open to all of our panelists, how do you encourage the people to break the language barrier?
You're the interpreter.
Just learn the language where you are.
I think there are lots of local groups that are started by citizens like yourself to help people from different countries and backgrounds to get accustomed to the culture. That might be one way. Are there any others that the panelists would like to share?
I found that if you yell, people can understand better. Yeah, they don't hear it, just yell louder.
That gets the attention for sure, yeah.
And I just want to add something. For example, I do employ ladies, Hispanic ladies, that most of them don't speak any English, but my customers are very kind, and they use translators like Google Translations, and that is a very good way to break the barrier.
Great, thank you.
Well, briefly, I'm not coming up with an answer, but just sharing an experience. It was my first day in England. Got off from the plane. Somebody said you should take underground train. So I went to the underground station, and I'm in the line, and then I tell the lady that I want to go to certain place, which she didn't understand. So I spelled it. The spelling is C-R-E-W-E. So I said, Crewy, or something else, no? So I wrote down. So she said, oh, you're going to Crewe. So that was first experience of language barrier. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. English is a funny language, as says a Bollywood movie. All right, so our next question is, how do you keep your culture alive at home? And that's Dr. Sehbi and Rosie, if you would like to answer that.
You want to go ahead?
I just keep doing the things I used to do in Mexico. I still cooking Mexican food. I have learned a lot more kind of foods here, how to cook them. Like, for example, my husband is from El Salvador, so I had to learn how to cook pupusas. That is not a dish from Mexico, but it is very tasty. So I just keep doing just things as I used to do in Mexico, for example. And I keep talking Spanish at home to my kids also. I think that is very important because some families forget their language, forget their roots. So I think it is very important to keep our culture in our home with our kids.
Well, I don't know the answer. It's very challenging. My two children, they speak English, and my daughter can speak English and Spanish, but not Punjabi. So we have not been successful in that. But I think it's too late now, but for parents in the future, or even present, it's very important to speak in your language at home. But then you worry about child going to school, how is he going to communicate with other kids? Will he be kind of behind? Will he be seen like a little backward or not very intelligent? Or that? So it's very difficult. I don't know the answer, but that's a challenging question.
As we wrap up this inspiring panel discussion, I'd like to extend heartfelt thanks to our wonderful panelists. Your candid stories have provided invaluable insights into the power of diversity within our community. I hope that you all enjoyed listening to the panelists tonight. For me personally, today's event has reminded me of the beauty when cultures converge, when we listen and appreciate unique perspectives. So again, thank you so much for being here today, and a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.